Shaky used to be a writer before the crossed outbreak began, but the only thing he is writing now is a personal journal. He thinks he's seen it all until he sees a crossed man violating a dolphin by using its blowhole. The man sees him watching from the telegraph pole and decides to go after him. Luckily, he was on the other side of the sea on a small island, and he has enough time to sound the alarm. Vincent was fishing that day and he doesn't notice the man slowly approaching him. Shaky takes the rifle and wants to help him, but Elisa was nagging him from behind and he misses. The shot only grazes the man's ear and he still makes it on Vincent's boat. But luckily Elisa is a better shot and she hits him straight in the head, blowing his brains out. The people rushed to the beach to see what was happening, but the danger wasn't over just yet. Other crossed heard the gunshot and they rush into the water, running after Vincent. They get to him and viciously attack him on the boat, mutilating his body and violating his corpse. Once they were done with him, the crossed head towards the island, but the people on the beach shoot in their direction, killing most of them. Elisa throws a Molotov in the water and finishes the last of them by lighting them on fire. Don used to be a professor at Oxford, and he thought it would be a good idea to keep track of time. They haven't been doing it ever since they got here. But the others don't see the point. Why bother keeping track of time when it's literally the end of the world? The island is called Kava, aka Eden, but nobody calls it that with a straight face. The people living here have formed a small community, and they keep watch during daytime at the telegraph pole in the south and the lighthouse in the north. During the night, they rely on the traps which are scattered everywhere around the sleeping areas. Shaky was writing something in a small coffee shop in London the day the outbreak began. He learned a few things about himself that day, the most important one being that he is a coward. He didn't know what was going on and ran for his life, but there was chaos everywhere. People getting killed and mutilated left and right. There was also a carnival in the city that day, and the crossed were attracted to it like moths to a light. He'd never seen a sight more shocking than that, which was interrupted when a helicopter crashed in the middle of everything. In the present, the people were keeping watch at nighttime. They see a boat in the water and a couple of crossed searching for potential victims. Luckily, there is no electricity on the island and the place was pitch black. Rab is the first guy to arrive on the island and he taught everyone how to fish, farm and stay alive. He is the leader of this small community and Don is second in command, but they are in a constant state of disagreement. Don thinks they should leave the island and search for medicine and supplies, maybe even make contact with other people, but Rab thinks it's too dangerous. Out of nowhere, a boat carrying an injured cow is spotted in the sea, but something didn't feel right. Rab wanted to check it out, maybe even bring the cow on shore, but it's the same boat from last night, which was driven by the crossed. Rab thinks they should still try and do something, so he throws a rock at the cow, which was screaming in pain. Suddenly the boat explodes, killing the cow, revealing that someone had booby-trapped the boat, hoping to kill whoever gets aboard. After another heated argument, the group finally agrees to send a search party to look for supplies, but in 3 months from now. Life goes on as always, and the group goes to shore where they regularly set traps for animals. Luckily, a rabbit had set foot in one of the traps and the group was going to have delicious rabbit meat for dinner. The rabbit wasn't the only thing they spot. There is an elderly woman on the ground, but she was badly mutilated and missing her limbs. Des wants to put her out of her misery, but Elisa stops him, claiming the old lady is her granny. Her grandmother suffered a stroke when she was just 9 years old, and she took care of her for most of her entire life. This is the first time Shaky has seen her cry. He always thought she was a cop or something similar, because she is always a tough woman. The others leave her alone for a few minutes while they go searching for the other traps. Another rabbit had been caught, but someone had used the granny's hand to impale it, and the meat was infected. They go back and catch Elisa killing her granny. She wanted to be the one who did it, mostly because she felt resentment for ruining her life. Before bedtime, the group has a meeting, discussing everything that happened recently, including the booby-trapped boat and the mutilated rabbit. As always, Don wants to talk about who might have done this. It couldn't be the crossed. They are not intelligent enough. But the others only want to talk about one thing. Who's going on the search mission in 3 months? Shaky doesn't want to listen to this anymore and goes outside to write in his journal. Apparently, the waters surrounding the island are a mass grave for tens of warships which were sunk during the Second World War. He remembers calling his family, including his fiancée Jen, but she wouldn't pick up. Next, he tried calling his parents and his brother, but the people answering weren't his family anymore. He was in a state of shock, wandering the streets on autopilot, staying unseen, staying lucky. He remembers passing next to an international landmark and wondering where all the tourists were. His question was quickly answered when a crossed tourist saw him and attacked him. He started running towards the subway, but he tripped on the stairs and fell down, knocking his head on the pavement and going unconscious. Even though he had already seen some horrible things, nothing could prepare him for the shocking sight in front of him. A giant orgy of violence, hundreds of crossed viciously attacking people, mutilating their bodies and using their corpses for personal pleasure. Shaky managed to stay alive by hiding like a coward in a dark corner, but loud noise caught their attention. It came from outside, and they all started running up to see who made it. A few lucky survivors were overrun and killed in seconds. Poor blokes never knew what they were up against. He continued walking through the city, heading towards the Millennium Bridge, which was always his favorite view of London. It was a sight to behold. The city was in complete chaos. There were fires everywhere, and he could hear people screaming in the distance. He thought this was the end of the world, so he decided to take his own life by jumping in the river below. In the present, he starts vomiting, remembering his family who was probably dead now, and the gruesome sights were haunting him to this day still. He continues writing in his journal, talking about performing daily chores like covering the sheep with nettle juice, which was disgusting to him. The older women made fun of him, but he lived in the city his whole life and wasn't used to this. Roshan, a 15-year-old girl living with them, comes up from behind and grabs his ass, asking if he wants to take a little break. Her father was working the fields in the background and asked her to go back to work and stop talking to Shaky. One of the sheep attacks him and he panics, thinking it wants to fight him. The other people find the entire scene hilarious, but luckily Masood, Roshan's dad, comes to his rescue. His daughter went missing all of a sudden and the mother asks Shaky to go look for her, but not tell the father. There is an abandoned house on the shore, but when he goes inside, he finds Roshan making love with John, one of the bigger guys from the community. Shaky remarks that the guy is big and strong and isn't very smart, and Roshan did ask him first. While her parents were busy searching for her, they neglected their youngest son and left him to play alone next to some ravens. Unfortunately, the ravens had brought infected human flesh onto the island, and the young kid was quickly infected, turning him into a crossed. They quickly brought a small cage and put him outside while they discussed what to do with him. Don thinks this is a great opportunity for them and he wants to study the young body. Maybe they can learn more about them and even find a cure. Shaky thinks this is a stupid idea. This isn't Hollywood after all. They can't fight the infection. This is the end of civilization, and there is no cure. Elisa asked them to stop and think about the boy's family. What they must be going through right now is horrible. John thinks Don's idea isn't so bad after all. They plan to leave the island soon and anything they can find out about the crossed before that might come in handy. Shaky blames him for what happened to the boy. If he wasn't busy making love with Roshan earlier, his parents wouldn't have been distracted searching for her. Masood comes towards them, and John thinks he might have overheard the truth about Roshan. In fact, he only wants the man's gloves and mask, because he feels it's his responsibility to kill his own son. The group has another meeting and Masood volunteers to be part of the group that leaves the island, but Rab and Don disapprove. They both decide they won't allow volunteers anymore. Instead, they'll run a lottery and draw the names of the people who will go. The next day, a couple of crossed have crashed their boat on a couple of rocks and attacked 2 sea lions sleeping there. They were too busy to see the lighthouse and see the people who were watching them. They didn't sound the alarm because the crossed were very close to their location and making more noise would attract them. One of them hears something and jumps in the freezing water, but the current was too strong and it drags him underwater. Seeing him drown triggers another flashback, this time right after Shaky jumped in the water, but he didn't drown because the river cops dragged him out. He thought it was the end of the world and everyone had turned. That's why he wanted to take his own life. The captain sees a couple of army helicopters flying over the city and he thought the cavalry had arrived. The poor soldiers had no idea who they were up against. They didn't even have basic protection for the piss, the spit, the blood splatter, and of course the bites. Most of them were quickly infected, turning crossed as well and then turning on each other. Nobody had any idea just how fast the virus could spread, but they quickly realized there was no salvation. At first they thought they were safe on the boat, but things took a dark turn when the cross stole one of the smaller boats and headed towards them. The army had been defeated and one of the tanks fired towards them, nearly hitting the river police boat. Another officer had been unconscious this entire time, and when he came to, he was crossed as well. The people on the smaller boat fired a rocket launcher towards them, and Shaky was forced to jump in the water for a second time. But this time, he fought for his life, even though just 20 minutes earlier he had tried to kill himself. In the present, Shaky couldn't sleep and continues writing in his journal, recounting everything that happens on the island. He goes to the lighthouse to talk to the people keeping watch, and something was happening on the rocks where the man was stranded. Other crossed had arrived on the rocks and a small orgy of violence erupted, but luckily they weren't spotted and there was no easy access to the island anyway. The biggest problem on the island, aside from the constant threat of the crossed, is boredom. Every night the group gathers together in one of the houses, but tonight they get into another heated argument. Shaky is against the lottery that chooses which people will leave the island to search for supplies, but before they can settle the argument, something rings the bells on the telegraph pole. Lance, one of the younger boys, was supposed to muffle the bell to prevent it from sounding the alarm during the night and attracting enemies, but he forgot. The troop talks about who should go there and muffle the bell again, but Don thinks it should be Lance because it's his fault. John volunteers, claiming the others all have families while he has nobody, and if something bad happens, it won't be a huge loss. The sleeping houses were surrounded by traps, and it was easy passing them during the night, but he manages. However, after only a couple of minutes, the group hears gunshots in the distance, signaling that the Crossed have made their way onto the island. John comes back running for his life, while a couple of Crossed were chasing him. Unfortunately, he gets stuck inside the barbed wire and he can't move anymore, while the crazies are right behind him. The group rushes to help him, but it is dark and they can't get him free or get a clear shot. One of them starts peeing on his legs and the others are afraid of getting infected. Don gives the order to pull back and leave him behind, and Shaky is the first one to run back to cover. The Crossed eventually get to him, but Don throws him a knife, asking him to take his own life. One of them takes his penis out and wants to violate him, but John uses the knife and ends his life on his own terms. Everyone else then picks up a gun and lets them have it, shooting the remaining Crossed and taking them out. They didn't need to worry about hitting John by mistake because he was dead now. Shaky accuses Don of throwing the knife towards him instead of doing more to save him, but he defends his action. This is why they can't allow volunteers for the mission on the mainland, because the stronger people always volunteer first, leaving the useless ones like Lance behind. The lottery is the best way to choose who goes and who stays, and in the end even Shaky agrees to this. It's already been a week since John died, and life goes back to the usual routine, reinforcing the defenses, checking for lurkers from overnight, taking the sheep to pasture and others. Someone rings the bell from the telegraph pole, but it wasn't because they spotted enemies, it was someone else. Jackson is a man who often visits the community and trades with them, but he lives mostly alone on the mainland. The group takes a boat to go to him, but Rab isn't too thrilled to see him. They have some bad history between them. In the past, after the boat was destroyed, Shaky managed to swim all the way to shore, and he spent the next week alone living in the forest nearby. One day, while trying to shit behind a tree, some Crossed heard him fart and came running. In the present, Jackson is attacked by a couple of crazies, but he's one tough son of a bitch and he easily takes them out. He didn't live on his own all this time because he couldn't take care of himself. He claims he brought many things to trade, including ammo, food, consumables, and he even has some information. In return, he only wants a pair of pink shoes, a sheep that he can take back with him, and someone to pull his finger. That's right, he must be completely mental. The trade was well worth it. He bought soup, veggies, bulbs, batteries, gas, and even ammo. He also claims he saw smoke in the hills and boats, large groups of people moving, carrying weapons, but they aren't survivors, they are Crossed. Don wants to ask him to stay with the group. After John's death, they could use a strong man like him, but Rab is sure he wouldn't choose to stay, so why bother to even ask him? Jackson is a loner. At nighttime, he leaves the camp and goes towards the edge of the island, choosing to sleep alone. That's the difference between him and Shaky, who couldn't survive alone for more than a week after the outbreak. Luckily, he was saved by a group of people who were walking through the forest and saw him getting attacked. Mr. Tooley, aka Gamekeeper, chose to take him with them, and so he spent the next 8 months surviving together. Shaky is convinced that if they're gonna do a lottery, his name will get picked, but he won't survive out in the wild. He wants to stay on the island and decides to cheat the lottery, but he doesn't know how just yet. Don and Rab put everyone's names inside a small box, in preparation for the lottery, which was only 3 weeks away, but they were keeping a close eye on it. Shaky talks about the love situation of everybody on the island, starting with Elisa, who he thinks resembles a lesbian. Roshan is still flirty with him even though she cries for John most days, and she's also 15. Celine and Maria are too old for him to be romantically involved, and they even smell bad from spending too much time among the sheep. James is attractive, smart, perfect for love triangle material, but he's extremely gay. Meanwhile, Jackson prefers the company of sheep rather than being with a woman. And then there's Tabitha, who is a beautiful blonde girl who loves to draw. She doesn't seem fazed by all the apocalypse that's going on around them, and even uses the rotten body of a Crossed as her subject. In the past, Gamekeeper made fun of Shaky after finding out that he used to be a writer, a comic book writer even. In this new world, writers are completely worthless, and that's why he was the leader, because his skills actually mattered in the real world. Shaky tells Tabitha he has an idea for her next drawing, but he was just trying to find something to keep the others busy while he cheats the lottery. His plan works, and he convinced Don and Rab to stand still and pose for her, while she tries to draw them. Everyone inside the community got involved. Entertainment was very scarce, and they take anything they can get. In the past, Gamekeeper was the leader of the group because he knew hunting, he knew fishing, he knew tracking and shooting and starting fires, all the skills necessary to live during an apocalypse. He told them which mushrooms to eat, when to move, when to stay still, and when to run. There were 10 of them at the start, but most of them were dead inside a week. Lloyd and Agnes came from a rich family, and Gamekeeper used to work for their dad, who was a lord. But nobody cares about titles anymore. The people at the top now are the ones who know how to survive. Shaky went to pee in the bushes and saw Gamekeeper sitting next to Agnes while she peed. She wanted some privacy, but he refused to move, claiming it's safer if he kept an eye on her. While everyone else was distracted with the painting, Shaky sneaks inside one of the buildings and tries to open the lottery box, but Rab catches him and punches him in the face. He got a swollen eye for the next couple of days, and the painting remained unfinished because Rab moved towards the end. The group leaves the island to search the traps and take Jackson and his ship back to shop. Everyone is kinda quiet, resentful towards Shaky, who was caught trying to cheat the lottery. Shaky is also resentful towards Skip, because unlike him, he actually has skills useful during an apocalypse. Before everything fell apart, he worked as a tourist guide, driving people around on his boat and showing them the sights. He still has the boat, and it was docked a couple of miles up north at Houghton Bay. They keep this boat in case of emergencies, but nobody can start and drive it except Skip, making him a valuable member of the community. In the past, Shaky and his group arrived on the highway and half of them wanted to take a police car and drive, but Gamekeeper was against this. He claimed the roads are dangerous and they would likely attract the crossed, putting themselves in a situation they won't be able to escape. He was right, because just a couple of days later they found the police car which crashed on the highway, and the people were viciously killed by the crossed. Jackson warns the group that the dock is not safe. There is something up on the hills around the port. A couple of bodies were hanged on crosses and a grenade was stuck in their mouths, almost as if they were booby-trapped. Back on the island, the group lives a routine life, but even here they have their own currency. They use pebbles as means of trading between each other and paying for things. This is the first time we see Sofia, a Spanish girl who can't hear and mostly stays inside, not participating in any of the island's activities. She isn't completely useless, however, because she serves another purpose. The men on the island pay her in order to make love with her, and she gathers their pebbles, making her one of the richest women on the island. Shaky is the only man who never used her services, and he wanted the other women's opinion about her situation. He asked Elisa and even Tabitha what they think about Sofia, but he mostly just wanted to poke and pry. The writer in him was dying hard. Sofia has her own rules. Mostly she works on a system of first come, first served, and the men would gladly give their pebbles to her. Shaky has never made love to her, and it's mostly because of 3 reasons. One is that he's a coward. Second is that he easily gets attached, and he doesn't want to get hurt. And thirdly, he doesn't want to use his pebbles on her, he likes being rich. Instead, he gives his pebbles to Don, trying to bribe him in hopes that he will cross his name off the list of people who will leave the island soon. One night he couldn't sleep, and Sofia visited him. He thought she wanted to make love, but she actually wanted him to follow her. She and one of the younger men just had sex, but the guy wasn't feeling too good and was puking. The dead crossed are floating in the sea around, and they suspect he might have been infected by eating the fish. But if that's true, it means that Sofia is infected as well, and this terrifies her. Shaky remembers seeing Gamekeeper and Agnes outside while he was taking a piss. He unzipped his pants and wanted her to touch his penis, and if she refused, he would abandon her with the monsters. He wanted to wake up her husband and tell him what he just saw, but he already knew, but he couldn't do anything. They wanted to stay alive. Shaky sits next to Sofia and they watch the Aurora Borealis, which was extremely beautiful that night. However, what he fails to notice is that she uses a blade to slice her wrists. The thought of her turning crossed was too much for her to bear, and she decided to take her own life. Don approaches him and gives him back his bribe, insinuating that he can't cheat his way out of the lottery. The boy who had sex with Sofia was getting sicker and Maria took care of him. In many ways, she was the perfect granny. They were keeping him locked up inside the lighthouse just in case he turned into one of the crazies. In the past, he and the group found an abandoned hospice, which wasn't as quiet as they thought. Someone was keeping sick patients tied to the beds and feeding them, which means the place was packed with supplies. In the present, Shaky visits Rab, who was keeping watch in the lighthouse, and starts writing in his journal. On his way up, however, he unlocked the door where the kid was staying, and by now, he was already turned crossed. The boy jumps Rab from behind, scaring the shit out of him, but he manages to pin him to the ground. Rab asks for help, but Shaky agrees to help in exchange for his name crossed off the list. Rab agrees and he shoots the kid in the head, blowing his brains out. Jamie and Lance took the dead bodies and dropped them in the water as far as possible from the island. But while they were out there, they heard some loud noise, possibly an explosion, maybe from Houghton, where the bodies were crucified with grenades in their mouths. In the past, the group found one of the nurses from the hospice and a couple of patients hiding in the basement. Sister Teresa refused to abandon the people when the outbreak began, and she's been living there ever since. Gamekeeper wanted to take the supplies and leave, but she didn't want to leave. Agnes saw how he looked at her and tried convincing her maybe Gamekeeper would focus his attention on her instead. The lottery eventually takes place just 2 days before a couple of people will leave the island in search of supplies. Don gives a big speech, but nobody cares about that. They just wanted him to get it over with. The first person to get chosen was Tabitha, the artist, followed by Celine, one of the older women, and Viceroy, one of the oldest members of the group. The last name to be pulled was Dez, but Rab holds a grudge on Shaky for trying to kill him, and claims Shaky is the last person to get selected. While everyone is making plans for the upcoming trip, he continues writing in his journal, unbothered by any of this. Dez actually wanted to be the one who left the island, but Don claims the lottery is final. It's no surprise why these 4 people were chosen. They are the weakest members of the community. The others all have useful skills and are needed to keep things working. We finally learn the truth, that Shaky actually wanted to leave the island. He bribed Don and tried to kill Rab because he wanted them to hate him, ensuring that his name would be on that list. He lived his entire life working as a writer for money, but now there's nobody to write for anymore. No point in imagining anything, and nothing for his brain to do anymore except remember. During one of his final lookouts, he sees Sister Teresa out on a boat together with other Crossed, pleasuring herself with a man's leg. This island is driving him crazy. He can't stop wondering about the mysteries that lay on the mainland. He can't stand the routine and the constant small talk. He needs a mission, he needs something with a goal, a purpose, and a meaning. That's why he wanted to leave the island and go search whatever is out there. The small group left the island and headed towards Houghton, where Skip's boat was docked. A Crossed was staying aboard the boat, but he was sick, and they quickly dealt with him and then dropped his body in the water. Out of nowhere they heard whistling, but it wasn't someone making the noise, it was the sound of mortar explosions going off in the water nearby. Someone was shooting at them, but luckily the wind was strong tonight, which deflected the shells away. They had no idea who was trying to kill them. Was it normal humans or infected ones? Someone was following them from a distance, but it was too dark to see if they were Crossed or not. Either way, they needed to get the hell out of here. Luckily for them, Skip's boat was very fast, and they were able to leave the boat far behind and escape into the open sea. They headed south and stopped to spend the night in the quiet sea, while Shaky took the first watch. He continued writing in his journal, remarking that this was why he wanted to leave the island. He wanted to see what was out there. He wanted to experience the dangers on the mainland. He wanted to feel alive again, so he would push himself to stay that way. They settled on a spot a couple of miles outside, which in the end was taking it easy. Little petrol run to ease them in. The weather was much colder here, and it was starting to snow. Tabitha remarked how beautiful the scene was, even though Shaky didn't see any beauty in freezing his ass off. They were following a map that belonged to John, that was marked up with all kinds of useful locations. The person in charge of the map was kind of in charge of the whole expedition, and in this case, that person was Shaky. They arrived at an abandoned petrol station, and the group decided to split up and search for supplies. John was a gun lover, and he had marked on the map every location where one could find weapons and ammo. But first, they needed other things. Before leaving Cava, they were given a list of things to look for, things they needed to prioritize and they needed to stay on track. In the past, Gamekeeper was desperately trying to convince Sister Teresa to abandon the patients and join their group, but she was too good of a person and refused. The old man was frustrated that she wouldn't listen to him, so he went outside for fresh air. But what he really wanted was for Agnes to give him a job. Before bedtime, Teresa wanted everyone to share their life story, but Shaky knew it was better to keep things to yourself and not share them with strangers. She was a good person and very useful, and because of that, Gamekeeper wanted her on his team. The next day, he walked in on them, claiming that one of his people was dying outside, so Sister Teresa went to check on him. It turned out the poor guy was hit from behind by Gamekeeper because he wanted everybody out of the hospice. Then he rang the fire alarm, which made a very loud noise, possibly alerting every Crossed in the area to their location. It didn't take long for them to arrive and run inside, armed with swords and knives. One of the older patients even managed to run outside, but she was caught from behind and killed right in front of them. Gamekeeper's plan worked out in the end, and Sister Teresa had no choice but to come along, even though she didn't speak a word for 3 days. In the present, the group found a young Crossed girl freezing in the snow, and Viceroy wanted to get closer. He thought she was harmless, but as soon as he took his mask off, she jumped at him. Luckily, he was saved by Jackson, and the young girl drowned in the freezing water underneath her. Shaky thought to himself that the only reason they managed to stay alive until now was because of pure luck. Before bedtime, Shaky remembered when Sister Teresa asked everyone about their lives, so he decided to do the same. Skip wanted to go first and told everyone that he, together with his wife and bigger brother, ran a successful boat ride business. During the first days of the outbreak, an aircraft fired towards the city, which killed many people and injured thousands, including his brother. They had to amputate one of his arms and legs, and he was recovering in the hospital when the Crosts started appearing. The group was ambushed by a couple of Crosts who came at them riding bikes, but Jackson took care of them with ease. Instead of helping, the others ran away and hid like cowards, which pissed him off. Skip did the same when the city was overrun by the Crost. He left his brother in the hospital, telling himself that he was probably killed by now. He and his family managed to escape, but the only thing going through his mind in that moment was how exciting the whole thing was. Skip had always been an adrenaline junkie, and escaping was the best thrill in the world. The group nearly escaped an attack from the Crost and found shelter among some abandoned houses. Celine was freezing and panicking, but Jackson refused to let them start a fire that would surely attract any Crost in the area. Shaky remarked that he and Jackson were like Rab and Don. One was the leader, while the other was the chief. But which one was which? Tabitha said she used to be an arts teacher, and she would make love to one of her students every Thursday afternoon. She hid in the attic above the art class when the outbreak began and continued to watch what was happening below. She saw that her student had turned Crost, and he continued coming there every day. She continued to paint, mostly her student, because it was the only thing she could think about. One day, the other Crost turned on him and killed him, while she watched the entire scene in horror. Tabitha had a theory. She thought the Crost were unable to communicate what they felt. They were like toddlers, endlessly throwing a tantrum because they couldn't articulate what they wanted. The killing, the raping, it was the only creativity they were allowed. The virus stripped everything else. Out of nowhere, an armed man jumped through the window, threatening them at gunpoint. Jackson sees that he was using an old shotgun, which isn't even in working condition most likely. On top of that, he doesn't even have any ammo for it, convincing the guy to surrender himself. He wasn't working alone, there was another one outside, but these guys are desperate. They are locals who used to live here before the Crost apocalypse and just wanted some supplies. Shaky makes a decision and tells them about Kava, promising to take them with him if they agree to help search for supplies. He tells them the next location on the map and asks them to meet there tomorrow. The men agree, and they won't have trouble spotting them in the snow because they have heat vision goggles. The others didn't talk to him after that because they didn't agree with his decision, but he was the one with the map, so it was his decision to make. The list included finding useful people after all. The group continued the journey, heading to the next location on foot, but Jackson had sneaked away, leaving them defenseless. He told them from the start that he would eventually leave, but Celine couldn't accept it, claiming they need him. They discussed possible reasons that convinced him to abandon them. Maybe it was Tabitha's life story, or maybe he didn't like how they handled those two guys. Either way, they are on their own now. The group finds shelter in an abandoned barn and decides to cook some food. Shaky still thinks he made the right decision in asking those two guys for help in exchange for entrance to Kava. But what he didn't expect was for them to be more than two guys. 6 people in total, actually. The group headed up to search for supplies, but they ran into a river and needed to cross it. Out of nowhere, more than 30 Crost came running towards them. They were probably grouped to keep each other warm. The group throws a tree over the river, and one by one they start crossing. Jasper is the try-hard bald guy who acts tough and bullies people around. Richie is a good kid from Kenya. He came to Scotland with a scholarship. Dolores is old and useless in a tight situation, but she used to work as a doctor and might come in handy. Mark is an odd one. Maybe it's caused by trauma, but he's kind of a joker and manages to make jokes even in a dangerous situation. Fortunately, he used to work as a cheesemaker, and they have plenty of sheep back on Kava. Miranda is a big and strong woman, built almost like a tank. She might come in handy. Barry is the last one to cross the river, and the others mentioned that one time he came in contact with infected blood and he might be immune to it. Unfortunately, he is also the first one to die after someone throws a knife in his direction and hits him in the neck. He fell in the river and the current dragged him down fast. The others were powerless to do anything about it. It's been 4 days since the river incident and the group continues gathering supplies. The people from the island sleep on the boat every night and reunite with the others in the morning on the mainland. Unfortunately, the boat isn't big enough to bring all of them back to Kava. They can only take 2 of them back, and Shaky needs to make a decision. One morning, the group returns without Jasper. Apparently, he took all the supplies and abandoned them, deciding to go on his own. In the past, Shaky and the group found refuge among some abandoned houses, and so far Gamekeeper wasn't focusing his attention on Sister Teresa. However, one night, Agnes wanted to take her own life and took a bunch of pills. She was in bad shape for a couple of days. That's when Gamekeeper turned his attention to Sister Teresa, but Shaky warned her about the old man and convinced her to pretend they were making love. This deterred the old man from taking advantage of her, and Shaky kind of fell in love with her. Apparently, Jasper didn't take only the supplies. He also took the map which leads back to Cava, but someone was following him, a man wearing protective gear and boxing gloves. Eventually, the group picks up everything on the list, and the only thing remaining was guns and ammo. They follow the map directions which lead them to Fort George, home of the Blackwatch 3rd Battalion Royal Regiment of Scotland. But getting close to the fort was another thing, because the place was surrounded by Crossed who were having a giant orgy. There are people inside who are willing to trade ammo, but they need medical supplies in return, and getting outside wasn't going to be easy. The group leaves the fort and travels to Inverness, a nearby town which was mostly empty since most of the Crossed were at the fort. They get lucky and stumble upon a pharmacy that was locked ever since the outbreak began, which means the place was packed. But that's not all. There was also an ambulance parked outside with the keys in the ignition. They would be able to transport everything locked inside. Shaky wants someone to volunteer to drive the ambulance packed with medicine inside the fort and use it to trade for ammo. Viceroy calls himself lucky, remarking that he nearly died to the Crossed girl when they first came here, and today it happened again. While everyone was loading the meds inside the ambulance, he was supposed to keep watch, but an infected attacked him. A person wearing a protective costume and boxing gloves came out of nowhere and saved his life. Shaky doesn't think much of it, remarking that it's probably just another crazy person. But why did he leave Viceroy alive then? Celine volunteers to drive the ambulance, but she also wants to tell everybody what happened to her family. Her family was on vacation when the outbreak began, and they were able to live in the trailer safely for a couple of weeks. Her husband eventually got sick, and they had to get more supplies, so she offered to drive the camper and bring back supplies. Unfortunately, she isn't a very good driver, and she was having trouble using the stick shift and making a lot of noise along the way. The Crossed heard the noise and ambushed her family inside one of the cabins, and the husband blamed her for not knowing how to use the stick shift correctly. This whole story isn't helping her case very much, but Shaky thinks she is highly motivated to erase some old stains from her past. Before starting the mission, Celine used makeup to make herself look pretty, but Shaky couldn't help but think how pointless any of this really was. In the past, Gamekeeper couldn't help himself, and he kept abusing Agnes, demanding she pay rent for keeping her alive. He banged her from behind while asking her to say hallelujah, just like Sister Teresa said when she pretended to make love to Shaky. Several weeks after what happened in the forest, someone had stolen Teresa's clothes, but Agnes offered to give her something smaller to wear, something almost see-through. In truth, she wanted Gamekeeper to focus his attention on the sister and leave her alone. In order for the ambulance to get inside the fort, someone needed to drive another car and distract the Crossed. Shaky wanted the new guys to be the bait, and even though Miranda was pissed as hell, she had no choice if she wanted access to the sanctuary. Shaky remarks that he spent most of his life being the nice guy, trying to get others to like him, but now he was acting like a jerk and almost everybody hated him. Celine was finally ready, and the mission with the fort finally began. Miranda was still objecting to being the bait, remarking that she's not even sure she wants to come to the sanctuary anymore. Tabitha wonders why Shaky is being such a jerk to her, but maybe he isn't acting, and he claims that maybe he isn't a very nice person after all. 4 people got inside a smaller car and drove towards the fort's main entrance, trying to get the Crossed's attention and lure them away. The plan worked, but Miranda got shot in the leg while trying to drive away. The gates ultimately opened, and Celine drove the ambulance inside the fort, but they closed just as fast. With Miranda out of the picture, Shaky wanted another volunteer to drive the truck, and this time Viceroy volunteered. After waiting enough time for Celine to unload the medicine and get the ammo, they drove to the gates a second time. Unfortunately, it had been a long time since Viceroy drove a car and he managed to stall it. They were nearly overrun by the Crossed, but he was able to start it again and escape just in time. Unfortunately, the doors didn't open again, signaling that something might be wrong inside. Celine and her truck were stuck inside and nobody was coming out with their share of supplies. The group tried again the next day. This time Viceroy was a better driver and things worked out smoothly, but the doors remained closed. Nobody ever came out and Shaky wondered what happened to Celine. Useless, cowardly Celine. They spent the night in the forest, but they were awoken by a powerful explosion which came from the fort. They had no clue what had happened, and they immediately rushed to go inside. The door was blown wide open and there were corpses everywhere, normal humans and Crossed alike. There were still a few survivors here and there, but the group easily dealt with them. This place was everything they had ever hoped for, and Miranda found a couple of machine guns tucked inside. Ammo was no longer an issue and they could use it as freely as they wanted. Even though things were looking good for them and they could take all the supplies they could find, Shaky couldn't help but wonder what happened to her. While the others were busy loading the weapons inside the car, he was determined to know what caused the giant explosion and what happened to Celine. He went inside and found a rope on the ground, but when he opened a door, a baby Crossed attacked him. Richie easily took him out, but Shaky continued to search for clues. He was determined to know what had happened here. There had been a big explosion at the door which caused a massive hole in the wall, allowing the cross to storm inside. The soldiers got into position and started blasting everyone in sight, but they eventually got overrun and ended up killing each other. Shaky noticed that there weren't any female bodies inside the fort, apart from the crossed women. This meant that there were mostly male soldiers guarding this place, and sending Celine in with the truck wasn't the smartest idea. She was probably violated by the soldiers, who hadn't seen a woman in months. Maybe she was able to escape and run outside, but there was nowhere she could go. She took a grenade in her hand and threatened to pull the pin, and when the soldiers didn't back down, she killed herself. There was so much ammo lying around that it probably caused a chain reaction, resulting in a massive explosion which blew the door wide open. In the past, the group stumbled upon a shooting and fishing store which was packed with supplies. The place was filled with weapons and ammo, and they couldn't wait to empty it. Shaky even found some Jack Daniels and started drinking. He offered Sister Teresa a sip, but she refused. She was always in self-control of her vices. The two of them liked each other, and there was definitely eye contact, hair fiddling, and blushing cheeks. If she were any other woman, there would definitely be something going on between them, but not Sister Teresa. She was devoted to her religion and didn't have a problem saying no. Gamekeeper walked inside and ordered Agnes to step outside and pay her rent, and Shaky wondered if Teresa knew what was really going on. They went in the back and the old man unzipped his pants, but Agnes begged him to focus on Sister Teresa and leave her alone. In the present, Shaky claimed they only had 3 places left on the boat and there were 4 of them, so they organized a draw. Whoever picked the shortest straw would get left behind, but just like on the island, Shaky cheated again. He made sure that Dolores, the oldest of the group, got the shortest straw. She wasn't actually a doctor. She worked as a dental nurse and would be a completely useless member of their community. In the past, Agnes's husband watched as his wife pleasured the old man, but it finally got to him, and he decided to do something about it. The group had finally gathered everything and it was time to go back home, but everyone was feeling uneasy. They felt bad about leaving Dolores behind, and even though they left her plenty of supplies, she begged them to take her along. It's not like they couldn't make place for her, but Shaky didn't want to take unnecessary people back to Cava. Now that the mission was finally over, Viceroy wanted everyone to listen to his story. Before the outbreak began, he had just lost his mother. He got fired from his job, while the boss remarked that he can't compete with younger salesmen. He went through life being kicked in the balls, never made a single decision on his own. He just accepted all the shit the world slung at him. He returned home and found out that on top of everything else going bad in his life, his wife was having an affair. He finally had enough and lost control and attacked his wife, butchering her with the kitchen knife. He was locked away in prison. But when the cross took over the country, the guards opened the cell doors and let everyone out. Nobody even paid attention to him, and he walked out unharmed. In the past, Lloyd was going through the same thing, tired of Gamekeeper taking advantage of his wife, so he decided to do something about it. After spending nearly a month on the mainland, the group finally arrived back home and the island had never looked better. But Richie wasn't impressed. He thought it would be something nicer than this. After what happened at Houghton Docks when someone tried to kill them, Skip found another place to dock his boat. Upon getting closer, they saw a bright light beyond the hills, and everyone was curious to know where it was coming from. Shaky, Richie and Viceroy formed a small party and went to check it out, not knowing what they were gonna find. The light was coming from a giant bonfire, while the crossed were gathered around it, having a massive orgy. Former soldiers armed to the teeth were having a good time, and in the middle of everything, there was Sister Teresa. The men went back and everyone headed towards Cava, this time in one of the smaller boats. They unloaded the supplies on the beach, but it was dark and dangerous to head towards the sleeping houses. They decided to spend the night there and wait till morning. But Viceroy was curious to know if Shaky knew the woman at the bonfire because he seemed to recognize her. In the morning, the people from Cava were coming around the hills to greet them, but as they got closer, they started shooting towards the people on the beach. Surviving a whole month on the mainland, just to get your head blown off by your own crew back home. What a way to die. Luckily, nobody was injured and Jasper removed his mask and welcomed everyone home. In the past, Lloyd confronted Gamekeeper behind the store as Agnes was pleasuring him. He wanted him to stop and threatened the old man, but he didn't have the courage to pull the trigger and the old man shot him in the leg. He wasn't dead just yet, and as punishment, Gamekeeper began whipping Agnes in front of him as he bled to death. Shaky was a coward and too afraid to do anything, so they just stood still and watched. Shaky accused Jesper of being dangerous and racist, claiming he attacked the others and stole their supplies. He can't be trusted, but the only reason he was able to find the island was because Shaky left love letters all over the mainland, detailing the location of the island. In the past, Sister Teresa found them behind the store and demanded to know what was going on. Shaky claimed the letters were nothing more than therapy to him about someone he used to know and love greatly. But the others weren't buying it. Elisa claimed he put all of them in danger. If Jasper was able to find the island, so could the Crossed. Everyone was mad at him, especially after he tried to cheat during the lottery, and now the stuff with the letters. Everyone on the island turned on him, and every time he tried to start a conversation, they would tell him to fuck off. Even Skip's son took a piss at him. That little fuck never liked him anyway. Richie was the only guy who talked to him, but he always made sure that nobody could see them spending time together. The leaders wanted to have a word with him, claiming that Jasper was causing too many problems, disrupting the governance balance and luring people to his side. But he was too aggressive, and sooner or later he was going to cause a disaster. At nighttime, Jasper sneaked into his room and threatened him, claiming he knew about his conversation with the leaders. He accused him of plotting something and asked him to leave the sanctuary. Shaky was a bona fide coward, and he didn't deny it. But tonight he stood up to Jasper and asked him to pull the knife away. This probably saved his life, but Jasper wasn't backing down and claimed ownership over his room. Shaky was forced to move into the drover's cottage near the beach, where he wasn't safe and was exposed to possible attacks. Tabitha visited him, but didn't stay long, and Richie brought him some food, but he was afraid of being caught by the others. Rab and Don visited him as well, but they were plotting against Jasper, who they claimed was talking about fighting the Crossed, giving them a taste of their own shit. According to them, he was completely crazy and couldn't be trusted in a leadership position. But the others liked him and supported him. In the past, Sister Teresa confronted Gamekeeper and even took his gun away. He was completely in love with her and asked her not to hate him. Don suggested killing Jasper. Of course, they didn't want to get their hands dirty, so they came to him. He continued writing in his diary, remarking how he managed to turn everyone against him, even Jackson, who left the group probably because of him. Tabitha visited him and was curious to know if he still loved the woman from his letters, Sister Teresa. She never knew he had a soft side and was attracted to him. They spent the night making love on the floor, while he continued thinking about Sister Teresa and Gamekeeper. The group was on the mainland searching for traps, but they returned with something even better. They were able to catch a couple of rabbits, and they even found a crate filled with ammunition. Jasper was extremely proud of himself and took all the credit, claiming it pays off not being scared to search for stuff. In the past, Agnes took her own life by hanging herself in the forest, but this pissed off the old man. He started hitting her corpse, calling her names, but Shaky tried to stop him. This prompted the old man to hit him in the face with the back of the rifle, leaving him with a cut. Shaky was suspicious about the way they found the crate, abandoned on the ground like that, but Jasper didn't think anything of it, and loaded a couple of rounds into his shotgun. The two of them got into another heated argument, and Shaky wanted to punch him. Jasper turned around and put the barrel against his chest, threatening him. This wasn't the first time it happened. He was in a similar situation with Gamekeeper after Agnes took her own life. Jasper wanted to kill him and shot, but the shotgun malfunctioned and exploded in his hand. The explosion was powerful enough to blow off his hand, and a piece of metal flew straight into Richie's brain. The bullet struck Viceroy in the ear, but it barely grazed him, and he was thankfully still alive. However, there was something else wrong. The shells were all booby-trapped. They were covered in human excrement. After the incident in the forest, Gamekeeper left the group and stayed by himself, although he did come back once in a while to bring food to the group. They were better off alone, but once Ashoki got sick, they started to get worried. The tainted bullet had done its job, and Viceroy was now infected with the Crossed virus. Shaky knew that it was just a matter of time before he turned, so he prepared to end him. In the past, Gamekeeper always stayed close and kept an eye on them, even though sometimes he didn't show for days. Maybe it was the stress, or maybe from all the walking, but Ashoka was starting to talk in his sleep about taking his own life. Shaky hit Viceroy on the back of the head and put an end to his misery before it even began, but he saw something in the distance. He took Jasper's head vision goggles and saw a bunch of Crossed on the other side of the sea, looking towards the island. He spent the entire night on the beach, writing in his diary and waiting for the others to wake up. He took the bodies inside the house, and Don and Rab visited him, but they also brought the landmine. In the past, Shaky was keeping watch outside the library, but while he was smoking, Gamekeeper snuck inside undetected. He killed Ashoka in his sleep by strangling him, and then went after Sister Teresa. The three men carried Jasper's body aboard one of the smaller boats and took him off the island. He wasn't dead just yet, but was unconscious because he lost a lot of blood. They took him to where the pile of rocks was, and then they planted the landmine, preparing a trap. We finally see the contents of the love letter written by Shaky, where he had hoped that Sister Teresa would find it, warning her to stay away from the island, because they would surely kill her if she ever came here. Once he finished smoking, he went back inside the library and found Gamekeeper raping her on the ground, while Ashoka's unconscious body lay next to them. Jasper eventually woke up about noon, but he was stranded on the pile of rocks in the middle of the sea. The people from the village had all gathered to see what was happening, but nobody wanted to go help him. Poor Jasper, he thought the others liked him and some of them were loyal to him, but he was wrong. The boat that was constantly circling the island saw him, but they refused to get close, realizing it might be a trap. In the past, the old man had carved a cross on Sister Teresa's face, just like the cross, but she was calm and didn't even scream. She had iron self-control and incredible restraint, and even as she saw Shaky in the corner, she screamed and begged him not to kill the old man. She was now on the boat, together with the man with the boxing gloves and Celine. Shaky thought she died at the fort, but he was wrong. She was still alive and being kept a prisoner. He finally had enough and detonated the landmine, even though the boat was safe enough from the explosion. In the past, he finally grew some balls and shot the old man in the back, killing him on the spot. Jasper was now killed and his body burned on the pile of rocks, while the crust on the boat returned to the mainland, leaving Shaky to continue writing in his diary. Winter was over and spring came along, but the weather in Scotland isn't very welcoming and it rained daily. Life on the island continues as usual. People tend to the animals and do the chores, while the crossed come to the island from time to time but are easily taken care of. The people have a predictable continuation of the universal distrust and dislike towards Shaky, well, almost universal. Tabitha continues visiting him, but she doesn't like spending the night because she doesn't want the others to see the two of them spending time together. Everybody was still thinking about Celine and the crossed who were keeping her prisoner, but they couldn't understand why they hadn't killed her. He remembers what happened after he found the gamekeeper violating Sister Teresa. She was lying naked on the ground, having a seizure. She was epileptic and didn't tell anyone. He was able to calm her down, and her seizure eventually stopped. But the old man was still breathing next to them. Someone sounds the alarm from the tower, but it wasn't the crossed, it was someone else. Could be raiders, could be friendly, but Elisa pulls out the guns. She isn't taking any chances. A boat filled with people arrives on the island, but they are worse than the crossed. They're bloody Americans. Sutton, Sean, and Dora are brought inside the home for questioning, and the leaders were relentless with the interrogation, demanding to know how many of them there are and where they come from. One of them introduces himself, claiming his name is Sean, and they live close to the island. If the leaders want, he offers to show them, and they agree. Shaky, Des, and Eliza were sent to follow Sean and see where his people were living all this time. Being stuck on Cava, they didn't get to see too much of other islands, and Shaky is impressed with how beautiful this place is, even during a thunderstorm. Eventually, they arrive at the destination, a giant fleet of ships floating on the sea, with over 388 souls on board. They couldn't believe how big the ships were, and Shaky is curious to know who's in charge. The captain greets them aboard the giant cruise ship and wishes them a nice visit. Sean claims they have everything they need here: engineers, navigators, gunners, growers, fishers, and even chickens. They've got a nice functioning community here. After touring the place for a couple of hours, the group returns back to the island for debriefing. Shaky was careful and noticed barnacles on the propellers, meaning they hadn't used their engines in ages. There didn't appear to be any fuel inside the barrels. They were only stacked for show, and also he didn't see any children on board. He thinks they're screwed and desperate, and they don't want the people on the island to know about it. The next day, an even bigger group of people comes to the island, but so far they haven't talked terms, trade deals, or what they actually want from them. Ted is the ship's first mate, and he introduces himself, but Don asks them to keep quiet and not answer any of his people's questions. And just as predicted, they had many questions. What's it like out there? How many of you are there? And Mark telling everyone he knows how to make cheese. In the past, Sister Teresa eventually woke up, but she had one hell of a hangover. Luckily, Ashok was alive as well. The gamekeeper had strangled him long enough to kill him, but he wasn't doing too good. Shaky brought her outside, where he had tied the old man to a tree and immobilized him. He put a phone in his pocket and set the alarm to ring every hour, hopefully making enough noise that would attract the crossed. He then said goodbye, thanking him for keeping him alive all this time. The first mate acted impressed. He saw the animals and had a nice dinner, but Shaky could feel that something was off. He knew that in reality, he was kinda disappointed and not really impressed with what they've got here, which means that their lives on the boats are a lot better. They have more than them here. Don strongly advises against showing the Americans their stores or talking about guns, and he won't let his people go aboard the boats either. Rab, however, doesn't see eye to eye and claims the Americans have invited guests for a tour of the cruise ship, and it's the people's decision, not his. There is still the odd chance that they aren't friendly. What if they abduct the guests to weaken them even more, and then storm the island and take everything they have? Things escalate, and Don loses control over the situation and even gets punched by someone. In the past, something had happened to Ashok. The lack of oxygen had damaged his brain, and he was acting crazy. Shaky thinks he is a liability that could get them killed and wants to abandon him, but Sister Teresa doesn't approve. Things were really bad, and he was even eating his own shit, just like the cross do, but Shaky agreed to keep watching him. The guests arrive at the fleet and Sean asks them to relax, claiming the people will take good care of them. Upon going on board, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Entire gardens for growing vegetables were spread all over the deck, and the people were working hard to make food. The cruise ship is tied to the other boats, and Dora takes them on a tour. They were even growing chickens, which were kept in cages to produce eggs. But Shaky is skeptical, while the others are thoroughly impressed. They even prepared a big dinner for them, and they even had beer, something they hadn't tasted in a long time. The control room still had running power, but they were only using it when they needed to, mostly for navigation charts and hot showers. Shaky wanted to meet the captain he saw the other day, but he was busy with something. He is also curious about Big Bertha, a giant ship that was in rough condition, but apparently that's an old rig runner used for maintenance and spill prevention. The group eventually returns back to the island, but Shaky was worried. He was worried that if the people see what kind of life those people have, they would leave the island in a heartbeat. Rab thinks it's safer on the island because islands don't sink, and they both decided to not allow any more visits to the fleet. Shaky goes back to his room, and Tabitha comes running, crying her eyes out. She is scared because she missed her period 2 months in a row, which means she is pregnant with his baby. The news comes as a shock to him, and Shaky doesn't know how to react. Instead of talking to her, he gets up and leaves. He keeps himself busy for the next couple of hours, ignoring her every time she wanted to talk, and even agrees to take Dora out for fishing. At least here on the open sea, he has plenty of time to think. It's not like he's freaking out about marriage and commitment and settling down. He's taking care of people. It's just that everyone who ever needed him, everyone he ever took charge of, everyone who ever relied on him, they're already dead, and he's afraid the same thing will happen to Tabitha as well. Dora claims the reason there aren't any children on board is because the cruise ship was running old people's tours through the Caribbean, and most of the crew didn't have their kids with them when it all went down. They've had a few children born on the ship, but most of them died. This world is harsh and kids just die. Shaky goes back on the island and apologizes to Tabitha, claiming he is sorry for being a prick and a coward, but he wants them to make it work. They'll eventually find a way. After a couple of days of negotiating, the trading's almost done and Don was just itching for the Yanks to be gone. He wants things to get back to normal, which means he gets to keep being in charge and people listen to him. Shaky remembers sleeping next to Sister Teresa, but she always kept her distance and didn't let things progress too much. Ashok woke up in the middle of the night and jumped on them, behaving like a child. By all means, he was pretty much retarded now. The people were carrying the last boxes filled with food and other supplies when Rab sees something coming towards the island. It was Jackson, who disappeared ever since the mission on the mainland. But he and Dora knew each other. She was happy to see him and wonders if he got a chance to check Flauta, but before they could talk more, he wants to show them something. Dora calls the people on the island kinda dumb, claiming this whole thing has been about one thing only, about oil. Flauta is a big terminal for the oil pipe, where the oil flowing there is unrefined and can't be used as fuel. While he was on the mainland, Jackson found Celine and brought her back, but she was in shock and could only say a couple of words. Clay Loan, X, time and place. She was taken to the lighthouse and placed under quarantine. They couldn't know if she was infected or not. They needed to wait a couple of days. Sometimes the infection takes its time. Maria claims there is no sign of infection, she is just in shock. But the others are worried she might be a trap, just like the injured cow on the boat. Jackson claims he met the people from the fleet when they ran out of fuel, and they were forced to come to shore looking for help. He told them to come here and showed them where Kava, but defends his action, claiming the Americans are good people who gave him shelter and food. He wanted to help them find fuel and headed towards another island called Flauta that holds an oil refinery. He went inside and found a bunch of dead bodies. Most of the people working there were brutally murdered, but he heard sounds of sex, pain, and laughter coming from inside. He didn't go inside, but he could feel the crust were watching him and he was scared shitless. That's when he found Celine still alive, sleeping on the ground. The only thing she was carrying was a letter, but it is empty and unmarked. Shaky remembers seeing Big Bertha in the fleet, an old rig gunner used for maintenance, which can also be used to refine oil. Dora claims they need help and wants to go outside and talk to the people on the island. She reveals the truth that she is the captain of the cruise ship, but hid her identity because she had to be careful. They came here because they ran out of fuel and planned to attack the oil reserves. Unfortunately, they don't have any weapons anymore, and the island is infested with the crust. The captain claims that any man, any woman, or any kid who donates their weapon and some ammo to the fleet will be offered a place on the ships. The Americans leave the people to make up their minds and return back to the fleet. Don and Rab are furious. If the people decided to leave the island, their little community will fall apart. They organize a meeting discussing everything that's happened recently, and besides the two leaders, most of the people wanted to leave the island, even though they don't say it out loud. Don claims that the guns belong to the island, and if anyone takes them, they will be accused of stealing and should be punished. Jackson confronts him, calling him names, claiming the people have a right to leave if they want. The only reason he helped in the first place is because they are decent people, and when they first met, they were weak and he wanted to help them. Eventually, he gets tired of listening to them speak and goes outside, but Shaky follows him. He wanted to know if Celine mentioned anything else when he found her laying on the ground, but Jackson doesn't like him very much and punches him in the chin. Jackson says he deserves it, calling him a piece of shit for what he did during the mission on the mainland. He calls him poison and asks him to leave him alone, claiming that bad things happen to folks around him. Shaky visits Tabitha, who is drawing on the shores, and wants to know if there is any hope for him. She thinks he is definitely an asshole pretending to be a nice guy, but she also thinks he is a nice guy pretending to be an asshole, like double bluff camouflage. Next, he visits Celine, who was recovering inside the lighthouse, but she was just repeating those words. Eventually, she wakes up and tells him what happened after she went inside the fort with a truck filled with medicine. The soldiers treated her nice, which is totally opposite of what Shaky thought had happened. However, the Crossed were trying to get inside and came up with a clever idea. One of them brought a cross and they catapulted him towards the giant wall, much to everyone's shock. Once the bleep was high in the air, the others used shotguns to fire at him, causing his body to explode and blood to be spilled everywhere. The soldiers who were keeping watch were quickly infected and they turned on each other. The place erupted in chaos and one of the women was injured, so she was taken inside to see a doctor. She had to remove her clothes, which were stained with blood, and the rope was used to hold her arm. But Shaky thought she was being infected by the soldiers. Her husband visited her, but he didn't know she was infected, and she turned on him. After taking out a couple of soldiers, she came out carrying a couple of grenades and ran towards the main door. She removed the pins and detonated all of them, causing a massive explosion which destroyed the main door. The place was engulfed in chaos as the Crossed all rushed inside, but one of them was wearing a dark suit with boxing gloves, and he took Celine prisoner. He took her into the forest but didn't kill her, even though she was completely terrified. They walked all the way to the pier, where the old woman was abandoned because they didn't have enough place for her on the boat. The man in the suit took them to where the other Crossed had made camp, where Sister Teresa was waiting for them. He gave her Shaky's letters, which were scattered all over the mainland, and she loved reading them. She let Celine live, but let the man in the suit the older woman as a reward for his hard work. Celine watched in horror the horrible things being done to that woman, and eventually fainted. She remembers being carried inside the boat and seeing the Crossed do unspeakable things, but Sister Teresa didn't let the others take advantage of her. When they saw that Jackson had come on Flotta, she untied her and gave her the empty letter, and that's when he found her terrified on the ground. Celine lost consciousness once again, but finishes the story repeating those words again: Clay Loan, X, time and place. The leaders have another meeting and invite Shaky as well, but things weren't looking great for their community. They all agree they need to do whatever it takes to stop the people from leaving because they've got a good thing going here and they don't want to lose it. Shaky remembers waking up next to Teresa and they stared into each other's eyes, and for a moment she felt it too. But then she blinked and closed her eyes, turning her back to him and going back to sleep. She said nothing. That was a beautiful moment. But now he wakes up to the sound of gunfire, and Roshan warns him there's danger. The Americans took a boat on the open sea, but they were attacked by a couple of Crossed. None of them knew how to shoot, and one of them gets impaled and thrown into the water. The group doesn't know what to do, but Rab agrees they should help, with Jackson being the one who leads the way. One of the women gets up and tries to shoot them, but she misses every shot. Shaky picks up a grenade and throws it towards the Crossed boat, while one of them jumps in the water to kill the person who fell earlier. The grenade detonates on impact, destroying the boat and killing all the Crossed. Sadly, there was nothing they could do for the one who fell in the water. He was stabbed to death by one of the crazies. The Americans say they wanted to scout Flotta, but they weren't prepared for an attack and are traumatized. Jackson left with them to go back to the fleet, and Shaky begins his first part of the plan. He tells Des and Elisa that Jackson warned them not to trust the Americans, claiming that they want their guns, food, sheep, and everything else. Jackson says they've done it before to other communities, and after they have the fuel as well, they'll sail to another location. Des and Elisa went along with the lie, and even repeated it during the town's meeting, even though they knew it was a lie. In the past, Shaky and Teresa arrive at an abandoned church, and she thought it was their salvation. They went inside and got into a heated moment and nearly kissed each other, but she stopped at the last second. There was a painting of Saint Mary on a giant glass, and she felt ashamed, as if she were betraying God. Tabitha also repeats the lie, mostly because she knew that Shaky was lying, but but she wanted to support him. He is the father of her baby after all. Ultimately, everyone on the island is convinced or persuaded to turn against the Americans, believing that they actually want to take everything they have. Don and Rab want to attack the fleet while its people go on their little shopping trip to Flotta, leaving the boats completely defenseless. Now that they've convinced the people on the island not to trust the Americans, the group spends the next 3 days planning the attack. They know they want to attack the Crossed and steal the oil, but they don't know the exact date and time. In the past, Teresa was afraid of being punished by God, claiming that Mother Mary knew what she wanted to do. But was it really such a bad thing? Shaky only wanted to kiss her, and she wanted to kiss him, but in the end, her will overcame her desire, and she stopped. Shaky tells the captain they made a decision, and they're not going to help them attack the oil depot. But Jackson doesn't believe him and demands to know how he managed to persuade the others to say no to a better life. As a token of good faith, they brought several guns and lots of ammo as a gift, and Jackson made sure they weren't booby-trapped. The captain decides to tell them the date and time of the attack, in 2 days at 7:48 a.m. Thanks to Jackson's reconnaissance, they've been able to learn a lot about the Crossed and have come up with a plan. The island is crawling with ex-NATO soldiers who are now savages and spend most of their time off the island, patrolling, hunting, and driving off other packs. Apparently, they leave the island every day at dawn, but they return at dusk, almost like they've got a cycle of sorts. This scares Jackson, but what scares him most is who controls them, remarking that they've even seen him, but instead of chasing him down, they left him be. In the past, Shaky and Teresa were having an argument because she liked it there and didn't want to leave, but it wasn't safe. While they were busy fighting, Ashoki took a shotgun and fired it at the ground, causing a loud bang. The gunshot echoed through the church and many Crossed heard it. They could hear the screams getting closer to the church, but there was no time to run. They needed to defend this place. Shaky gave her a weapon and asked her to shoot. God will forgive her later, and she did. Luckily, they weren't that many Crossed, and they were easily dealt with, just in time before more of them showed up. According to their estimates, they will need about 20 hours to fill the ship's tankers, and another 20 to fill the barrels, which means they're not sneaking in there while the Crossed are out. Instead, they're gonna try and wipe them out, face them head on, and try to kill every single one of them. The guests from Cava learned enough and decided to go back home. But before leaving, Shaky gives the captain a personal handwritten note. The day of the attack is here, and the people on the island wake up early so they can attack the fleet just as soon as its people leave for the oil reserves. Don gives a big speech, loves being in the center of attention, and he continues lying to them, claiming the Americans are the aggressors and they shouldn't feel bad about attacking them. While Don goes along on the mission and even leads it, Rab stays behind with the women, proving he is the junior boss of the island. Behind Don, Tabitha wonders if she should have stayed back. What if something happens to the baby? But Shaky wants her to come alone, reassuring her that everything's gonna be okay. Shaky remembers nearly being caught by the Crossed, and it was all because Ashoki couldn't keep his mouth shut. He continued behaving like this for the next couple of weeks, and it was getting very difficult to take care of him. One night, while Sister Teresa was sleeping, he got an idea. Shaky remembers what Don said before leaving, that they shouldn't feel guilty, and the only thing that matters is protecting what's important. That's exactly what he wanted to do with Teresa, and he woke Ashoki in the middle of the night and asked him to go for a little walk. The people from the island approach the fleet, confident that most of the men will be off on the mission and it's going to be easy pickings. So far, so good. They get aboard their cruise ship with ease, no chaos, no bloodshed, and no use of guns. Out of nowhere, someone shoots at them and Shaky nearly gets shot in the head by one of the crewsmen. He panics and asks everyone to stop shooting, but nobody listens to him and keeps going. Miranda wants to cut one of the bridges and cut off access to the cruise ship, but someone shoots her in the hand and she starts bleeding heavily. Don realizes they knew about the attack and things aren't going to be easy. Shaky finally has had enough and gets off, screaming on both sides and demanding them to stop firing. The shooting stops, but Captain Dora asks them to surrender and put the weapons down. Elisa takes one of the mothers hostage, but she was carrying her baby in her arms. Don doesn't care and forces the mother to hand over the baby, much to the captain's horror. He thinks he's now in charge and puts the gun to the baby's head, thinking he has the upper hand. First things first, and he wants to know how come they knew they were preparing an attack. Shaky is the one who warned the captain about what they were up to, but she doesn't expose him, claiming they delayed the attack on the oil reserves by 1 day just to make sure. She asks her people to shoot Don if he so much as twitches, but if that happens, the child dies, and there's going to be a massacre. Shaky sees for the first time just how calculated and smart Dora actually was. He could see it in her eyes that she was planning something. Suddenly, she gives the order, and Jackson throws a dagger straight into Don's throat, hitting his artery. He begins losing consciousness and falls down, dropping the baby straight on its head on the steel floor. The impact kills the baby, and the mother is horrified, accusing Elisa of killing her baby. She is the one who took her hostage and gave the baby to Dawn. It's her fault after all. Captain Dora pulls her gun and shoots Elisa straight in the head, killing her on the spot. Dora then asks her people to take Tabitha hostage, some sort of reassurance that the people from the island won't come back again. Tabitha looks behind, wondering if Shaky is going to do something about it, but he doesn't. This was his plan all along. He wanted her to come on the ship because she and the baby would have bigger chances of survival compared to the island. Dora lets them go back, claiming she's going through with the mission and will attack the Crossed at the fuel reserves, and if anyone gets in their way, she's going to kill them. She then politely asks everyone to get the hell off her boat. The people from the island return to their boats and make their way back to the island under the watchful eye of Jackson. They notice a large group of Crossed up on the hills, watching them, and Jackson decides to shoot towards them. In the past, Shaky took Ashoki in the middle of the night and abandoned him in the forest, claiming he would be back in a minute, but he never returned. In the present, Shaky takes the gun because he was curious to see if Sister Teresa was among them, and she was. Jackson hit and killed the one who was wearing a costume and boxing gloves, but when she removes his mask, we see that he was actually Ashoki. He lied to her, saying that Ashoki probably got up in the middle of the night and ran away, but they couldn't keep looking for him because the Crossed were around. She was now furious, and you could see real hatred in her eyes. She cared about him and wants revenge. Shaky remarks that endings are never tidy, there are always some loose ends. In his case, it was Ashoki. As soon as they got back home, Jackson attacked Rab and started unloading his anger on him. He was furious about the preemptive strike, and Rab took it, claiming he deserved it. The others tried to peek inside and see what was happening. In the past, Sister Teresa confesses why she became a nun in the first place. She was never a nice girl. She used to drink and do drugs, shoplift from time to time, and even her own mother cut her off. Then one day, she and a couple of her friends stole a car, but during the getaway, the car crashed, killing everyone inside except her. She took it as a sign, thinking that God spared her for some divine reason, and ever since that day, she's been living a good life and trying to be a better person. Dawn and Elisa had both been killed during the attack, and Shaky thinks that Jackson is going to tell Rab about the letter. He only warned them because he wanted to ensure that Tabitha would get a place on the boat and would be safe because his place is on the island. Instead of exposing Shaky, Jackson claims that the crazy nun they saw earlier is controlling the other Crossed, and she's extremely dangerous, so they need to take her out. Celine comes and warns them about Teresa, saying she is barely keeping the other Crossed from attacking the island, and it's all because of Shaky. Their conversation is cut short because the group sees a giant fire somewhere behind the hills, where the drift fleet was. They think something bad must have happened, so everyone grabs a weapon and heads in that direction. Unfortunately, their worst fear comes true. The Crossed had attacked the fleet and managed to get on board. There was panic, and people were being slaughtered left and right, but there was no sign of Tabitha anywhere. In the middle of everything, Sister Teresa sneaks aboard one of the smaller boats and leaves, prompting Jackson to ask who she really is. After kissing passionately for the first time, Teresa had a change of heart and wanted to be alone, so she went for a walk. Shaky was worried and went searching for her, but she was hiding under some rocks because the Crossed were around. In the present, Teresa was heading inland alone, and Jackson wants the best shooter on Cava to follow her. Elisa was the best one of all, but she's dead now, which leaves Shaky as the second best shooter on the island. Jackson sends the others back home to warn them, while he and Shaky follow Teresa on foot. In the past, Shaky found her hiding under the rocks, but she began having another epileptic seizure and was going to make a lot of noise. Jackson follows the trail while Shaky blames him for the attack on the drift fleet. If he didn't shoot Ashoka earlier, she wouldn't have launched an attack. The Crossed heard Teresa's noise and jumped to kill her, but Shaky shot her right in the face. Unfortunately, the gunshot alerted the others, and he hid under the rocks as well, hoping to remain undetected. Shaky uses his thermal goggles and spots a Crossed man somewhere in the distance. He reacts fast and shoots him in the neck, but not before the man shoots his gun as well. Unfortunately, Jackson was shot and he falls on the ground, claiming he can't feel his legs anymore. The Crossed was kept prisoner by someone and tied to the rocks. Jackson says there will be others coming soon and he can't walk anymore, so Shaky needs to do the right thing. In the past, he and Sister Teresa kept quiet and hid under the rocks, covered by dead leaves, and the Crossed didn't find them. Like always, Shaky is a coward, and he can't pull the trigger. Even though Jackson claims he knows where they live, he knows where they keep the food and weapons. He's too dangerous, and they don't want him being turned. Eventually, he puts one bullet in the chamber and gives him the weapon to kill himself, but he only put one bullet in the chamber, making sure he wouldn't get shot in the back. Jackson calls him a viper one last time, and then he puts the gun in his mouth. wishing he had been born on Jupiter. He pulls the trigger and blows his brains out, splashing blood everywhere on the ground. Sister Teresa eventually woke up, and she was happy to see that Shaky had kept her safe. The two of them stared, making out, and he quickly unbuttoned her blouse, wanting to get freaky. Shaky picked up Jackson's things and went looking for her, but she disappeared for a second. She appears out of nowhere, but he couldn't understand where from. She wasn't there a minute ago. In the past, they made love on the dead leaves, forgetting everything that was wrong with the world in that moment and enjoying it. He goes after her, but he doesn't want to be seen, so he keeps his distance. However, they weren't the only ones on those hills, because someone else was there. It was the gamekeeper. The old man was badly injured, but he was still alive and hiding in one of the caves. Shaky runs back to reunite with the others, but he trips on something and falls on the ground. He gets up immediately and keeps running, but he drops his pen on the ground. He remembers making love to Sister Teresa, but in the middle of it, she asked him to stop. There was another cross running around, but they were safe because he didn't see them. In the present, he gets back to the others and tells them Jackson's been killed. He saw the gamekeeper back there, but he was too afraid to confront him, and now he regrets it. He should have shot him in the face and been done with him once and forever. Teresa wanted him to stop and get out of her, even though the cross had moved on and it was safe. Shaky was pissed because he didn't get a chance to climax and he wanted to finish, but Teresa just wanted to move from this place. The group arrives back on the island where the others were waiting for them, but something was wrong. They were pumping gasoline into the water, but the only reason they would be doing this is in case of emergencies. Unfortunately, this was an emergency because the cruise ship was overrun by the cross, and they were now heading at full speed towards the island. The giant ship crashes into the shores, causing it to come to a sudden stop, which creates shockwaves across the water. Many crossed couldn't wait to get onto the island and start jumping into the water, but the people were continuing to pump gasoline. Some of them were going down the ladder, including Captain Dora and her crew. Skip throws a Molotov next to the ship, causing the gasoline to ignite and light everyone on fire. This works and it's enough to slow down the initial attack, but more of them were dropping down. Shaky throws another Molotov, this time landing next to Captain Dora, but she manages to fire a shot, killing one of the women on the island. Another fire erupts and the captain is killed, but more of them escape and keep running towards the island. The people were desperately firing at them, trying to delay them as much as possible, but eventually they are overrun, and Rab gives the order to retreat. Shaky was missing a pen and he runs into the nearby house to fetch another, but upon going inside, he finds Tabitha searching through his things. They are both shocked to see each other, and he wanted to know if the baby is still alive. In the past, he and Sister Teresa arrive in one of the smaller towns in the area, but they are shocked to see a small girl all alone in the streets. Mark walks in on them and shoots Tabitha without thinking, killing her on the spot. Shaky avenges her by shooting him in the head. Even if she was turned, he still cared about his unborn baby. Now, there is nothing else he can do about it, so he gets another pen and leaves to be with the others. There is chaos everywhere around him, but he's unbothered by everything and just keeps walking. Mr. Mozod's wife gets killed by the cross and he was powerless to do anything about it. Fortunately, the traps were enough to slow them down, and one by one the people took them out. However, they weren't out of danger, because 3 more ships come at them from behind, and they were all run by the cross. Rab analyzes the situation and gives the order to abandon the island. They were about to get overrun. This island was their home for the last couple of years, but now they have to abandon it or risk getting killed. Mr. Mossad lost maybe more than anyone, his wife and his son, but ever since his boy died he's never been the same. He decides to stay behind and face the cross, even though he still had one daughter left in his life. There were 2 claymores left from the mission on the mainland, and he uses both of them to blow himself up. He took many crossed with him, but the remaining ones were slowly taking over the island, dancing on the shore, slaughtering the animals, and burning everything in sight. In the past, Shaky and Teresa found an empty church and climbed all the way to the tower. They thought this place was abandoned, but they could hear someone praying upstairs. As the people were heading towards the mainland, a couple of boats filled with crossed soldiers come towards them. One of them jumps in the water, but the current was strong and he quickly drowns. Another stands up and removes his cloak, revealing himself to be an old priest, someone that Shaky met in the church's tower. He was hiding there together with a couple of children whom he took care of ever since the outbreak began. The crossed were preventing them from leaving the island, so Rab gives the order to go back and face the music. They were desperate and out of options, so the only thing left was to fight off the crossed that have taken over their home. If they didn't win this, there was nowhere else to go, and that would mean the end of their community. Edith gets infected during the attack and quickly turns into a crossed, but Shaky puts her out of her misery. Reverend Moses White introduces himself and asks them if they wanted to drink some whiskey. The church had a little creche, which was run by him and his wife, but when the outbreak occurred, she was killed. He and a couple of kids were able to survive by hiding here, and he does a few trips out to get food. Shaky thinks his story is kinda boring, but he enjoys the whiskey and doesn't mind listening to it. He knew they had to keep moving north, where it's colder and the crossed aren't as many. Deep down he knew the kids were going to cause a problem for him, because Sister Teresa would want to take care of them, or even take them along. For the first time in a long time she was happy, just like taking care of the old folks back at the hospice. Eventually they managed to kill every crossed on the island and take their home back. Shaky keeps thinking about the envelope that Celine brought back, and he thinks it's a hidden message. Teresa told him the location where he wants the two of them to meet, but he still needs to figure out a date and a time. There were lights coming from every direction, signaling that the crossed had surrounded the place and there was nowhere to run. In the past, Teresa confirmed his suspicion and told him she wanted to stay there with the kids. As the people clean up the island from rotten bodies, Shaky tries fishing while continuing to write in his journal. It's been several days since the attack and things weren't looking too good for them. There were corpses everywhere and the food had run out or was destroyed by the crossed. Skip and his family tried to run away in the middle of the night, but they returned the next day. Everyone was angry at them for abandoning them, but Jackie was killed during the escape. Karma had already done its thing. Apparently, Skip took one of the smaller boats all the way to the harbor where he had his tourist guide boat. However, one crossed was waiting for them and he attacked Jackie with a harpoon. He stabbed her in the leg and dragged her into the water, and Skip was forced to leave her behind and save his son. He was mad and shouted at Shaky, demanding to know what he did to the nun that made her so furious. The crossed returned to the island, but this time they had Jackie all tied up and were taking turns violating her. Reverend Moses was the first to get a go at Jackie, while the people watched in horror, powerless to do anything to help her. When he was done, he threw a Molotov at the boat, lighting it on fire and destroying their only good chance at escaping the island. The kid just witnessed his mother being viciously killed, but instead of comforting his son, Skip claims he met his mother when he was 2 years old, meaning he's not his real dad and doesn't want anything to do with him anymore. In the past, the Reverend thinks it's safe to go out and look for supplies because they were running low on food, but Sister Teresa has another seizure in front of them. Everyone has been terrorized enough, and Shaky decides to do something about it. He and Des leave the island in order to go to the designated location from the letter and hopefully talk face to face with Teresa. The Reverend knew exactly what to do when someone has a seizure like that, and Shaky was kind of jealous it wasn't him helping her. The crossed were pretty much split in half. Most of them were unable to control their urges and just attacked everyone on sight, while others were being controlled by Teresa and could control themselves. They allowed the two men to dock on the mainland and pass through unharmed, even though Des was itching to shoot some of them. There is a house with an X marked on top, just like the letter said. Shaky tears a piece of paper and writes down the time when he and Teresa should meet face to face. Tomorrow at noon, but Des wants to seal the envelope by licking it, remarking that it's kinda salty. Apparently, when the world ended, he abandoned one of his sons and just ran away. He was too scared to go back after him. He's been feeling remorse ever since and hated himself for losing one of his kids, while he secretly hates the other for surviving. He doesn't want to feel guilty anymore and welcomes whatever happens to him next. The envelope was a trap, most likely tainted with the crossed virus, and he was slowly turning into one of them. He picks up his gun and goes after Shaky, but the man was ready and puts a bullet in his forehead. The crossed watch him go back to his boat, but none of them attack him. They just let him pass like he's one of them. He arrives back on the island, and the others knew that things didn't go well because Des wasn't with him anymore. In the past, everyone woke up after a good night's sleep, but Teresa was missing her bra. They eventually find it in the Reverend's jacket pocket, but they think some kid put it there for fun. He promptly returned it and started joking about the whole thing, while also giving her some whiskey to drink, which she accepted. Shaky couldn't help but feel jealous of him. She would never agree to drink alcohol if he offered her some, and he was even making her laugh. Shaky goes back on the boat and paddles all the way to the nearby island, where the crossed have their weekly orgies. He finds a radio on top of some rocks, and when he picks it up, Gamekeeper talks to him, claiming Sister Teresa is the one who poisoned the envelope. After he was tied down to a tree and left to die, Ashok found him and set him free. Meanwhile, after Sister Teresa was turned, she joined a bigger group and followed them around, together with Reverend Moses. She stayed in the back, stayed weak and useless, let all the others have their fun while she just watched. One day, they saw a group of people and wanted to attack them, but she saw that something was wrong. She saw a trap and asked them to take it slow and not rush all at once, but most of them refused to listen. The weakest ones died that day, but the crossed who survived started listening to her, and she became sort of their leader. The crossed alternate from periods of intense violence and activity when they find victims to periods of inactivity and boredom when they have nothing to do. Teresa taught them to show restraint while killing the victims in a few minutes. when they could take them prisoner and torment them for weeks in order to keep the entertainment going longer. She came up with the idea of wearing a suit in order to make sure the prisoners wouldn't get infected with tainted blood. One night, they found Ashoki and quickly turned him, but when the Reverend wanted to do the same thing to Gamekeeper, Teresa cut off the infected leg in order to stop the infection from spreading. She then took his severed leg and asked the Reverend to pleasure her with it from behind. They put the old man inside the suit and started dragging him alone, walking the empty hills and heading towards Kava where Shaky was. Apparently, while they were hiding in the church tower with the Reverend, Shaky had gone outside for a smoke and ran into a bunch of people who were heading there. He went back and told the others. That's how Sister Teresa knew about the island. They kept their distance but watched them every day. They even entertained themselves by scaring them, like they did with the injured cow and the boat. She controlled the others by promising them that something big was coming, but she never said what it was. She only mentioned Shaky's name. Somehow, he was in the middle of everything, but Reverend Moses didn't quite buy it. He tried convincing the other cross to turn on her, but her most loyal men protected her and quickly dealt with the mutiny. They made an example of the bad ones and crucified them, but left them alive and booby-trapped them. Teresa was furious when Shaky and the others left on the mainland to search for supplies. They tried stopping them by shooting mortars at them, but luckily nobody got injured. That's when she asked Ashoka to get in the suit and follow them on land. It was him who was following them all that time. Gamekeeper remarks that she's obsessed with Shaky. Maybe she thinks he's God. One day, Reverend Moses attacked him a second time, trying to finish what he started the first time, but the man still had it in him. He knocked him unconscious with a strong punch but got infected with tainted blood, so he was forced to cut off his hand as well. Even though he was badly injured, at least he didn't turn, and in return he carved an X on the man's chest. When Sister Teresa arrived, she took the old man's hand and asked the Reverend to again from behind. Maybe she was doing it to keep her people entertained, or to show her dominance over Gamekeeper. One night, they found a group of people in the middle of nowhere, camping next to a fire. They viciously attacked and did all of them, all except one, that asshole Jasper. She then took Gamekeeper and kept him safe inside a small cave, and she regularly brought him food and even talked to him. She told him everything he's saying now. Not long after that, Ashok returned from the mission and brought Celine as a prisoner. Teresa bullied her, breaking her mind and repeating the same instructions that were meant for Shaky. They are the ones who left the box of shitty ammo on the shores for Jasper to find. The others were sure that Shaky was killed, but he wasn't, even though they wanted to attack the island that night. She was barely able to hold them off and had to assert her dominance once again by promising them something even more bloody. That's when they found the Drift Fleet, which had over 388 people on board, plenty to go around for everyone in her group. The old man continues his story, recounting the time Jackson came to the fuel depot and found Celine on the ground. Shaky couldn't help but ask the question, what does she want from him? Does she want him turned or dead? Or maybe something worse? The crossed soldiers wanted to attack the fleet and get it over with, but Teresa convinced them to wait, promising them a big ending, a big payoff if they kept waiting a bit longer. But when Jackson shot and killed Ashok, something broke inside her, and she ordered the attack on the fleet. They used mortars from the beach to cause massive explosions, and then they stormed the ships and brutally attacked its people. She knew that everyone who was turned that day wouldn't be under her control, so she let them do whatever they wanted. They decided to attack the island, while the smarter ones, the ones under her control, retreated. She knew the people from the island would win, but the attack would weaken them further, and that's all she wanted. Reverend Moses was given the job of keeping the people on the island and preventing them from escaping, but he is stubborn and was close to losing his grip. In the past, Shaky told Teresa about Kava, the isolated island that's a safe haven from the crossed. That's why she were to come. The batteries were running low and the two men prepared to end their talk. And Shaky claims he's not afraid of him any longer, but the old man wasn't alone. Teresa picks up the radio and calls him her love, telling him to go home. She warns him that the others are coming and she's not there to hold them off. The Reverend pours everyone some more whiskey, including Teresa, who was enjoying it quite a bit, but they ran dry. He wanted to run into the city and get some more supplies and offered to leave the two of them alone to talk. Teresa was right because a big pack of crossed comes running down the hills and he panics. For some unknown reason, they stop and fight amongst each other. Maybe they remembered what Teresa had told them, to leave him alive. Unfortunately, he stumbles on a rock and falls on the ground and the Reverend jumps on top of him. Shaky claims that Teresa ordered him to leave him alive and he stops, but he barely contained his rage. Shaky thought it was a good idea to send the kids away and let them play alone for a couple of hours in the church, but in fact, he just wanted the two of them to be alone. The whiskey was beginning to show its effects and Teresa was in a very good mood and even laughed uncontrollably. He secretly wanted to get her drunk. He knew that alcohol corrupts people's minds, and he wanted to take advantage of that. In the present, he finally arrives back on Kava, but the place was deserted and there was nobody around. Everyone has abandoned the island and nobody told him anything. He thought they abandoned him, so he gets down on the ground and starts crying. However, at dawn, the people returned in their small boats, carrying barrels filled with unrefined oil. He was happy to see them and wanted to know where they've been, but nobody wanted to speak to him. Even if he wasn't alone anymore, everyone was ghosting him and didn't want to answer his questions. In the past, he and Sister Teresa started kissing, but it wasn't like in the woods. This time she was more passionate, more savage. She wanted this to happen and wasn't holding anything back. While the Crossed were busy following Shaky, the people from the island went to Flotta Island and carried as many barrels as they could. Shaky claims they're playing with fire and getting off the island isn't going to be easy, but Rab asks him to stop talking to his people ever again. He felt abandoned and alone and wanted people to need him, but who needs a writer during the apocalypse? Teresa got on top of him and asked him to keep quiet, while she slowly unbuttoned her clothes and got undressed. One of the ships that was crashed on the island has an oil refinery on board, and Rab wants to turn it into diesel fuel to power the ship and leave this place. But the waters were crawling with Crossed and they weren't going to make it easy for them. One of the soldiers shoots and kills Maria on the spot, but they didn't continue the attack and retreated. While this was going on, Shaky continues writing in his diary, remembering the passionate moment he spent with Teresa in the church tower. Rab approaches him and wants to talk. He wants the truth of what really happened between him and the crazy nun. His people are dying because of her and somehow he's in the middle of everything. Two more guys come out of nowhere and immobilize him, while Rab prepares to hurt him with a crowbar. They're preparing to leave the island, but Shaky isn't going with them. And just to make sure he won't cause any trouble, he breaks his leg, while the poor man screams in agony. In the church's tower, they continued making love while finally confessing their love for each other. After a few hours, the pain became bearable, and Shaky was watching as the others were loading the ship with barrels. Out on the open road, it was difficult to get intimate with each other, but here it was safe, and things were hitting critical mass. Celine sees something in the middle of the night, and Rab uses his heat goggles to get a better look. There were fires all around the island, but it was too dark to see what was really happening. Sister Teresa fires a flare gun, which reveals the sinister truth. There were tens of boats filled with Crossed soldiers armed to the teeth and ready to massacre them. She was in the middle of everyone, and everyone was waiting for her signal, but so far she wasn't saying anything. In the past, she got very excited and felt something she had never felt before. She had her first orgasm and it felt amazing, and wanted to know if Shaky finished as well. Unfortunately, he wasn't quite there yet. It was literally the end of the world, and he was making love to the woman he adored. But for some strange reason, he couldn't come. The people panic and hurry to get on board the ship where it was safe, at least for now. Shaky was left behind on the beach and wonders what their plan is. Will they try to fight, or will they try and outrun the Crossed in the refinery ship? Reverend Moses found what he was looking for and was preparing to get back to the church, but two loner Crossed were wandering the streets and heading in the same direction. Shaky blames himself for luring Teresa to the island, but luckily she's in control because she's all that stands between them and the Crossed. She picks up the radio and asks Shaky to talk to her. They have unfinished business to take care of. The Reverend made it to the church in one piece. But the two Crossed were still roaming around and it was dangerous. Teresa asked him a question, trying to see if he remembers the church. But now she wasn't referring to the church where they made love. She's referring to the other church, where he and Ashok had a small fight which lured the Crossed to their location. She was forced to pick up a rifle and defend herself, but just wanted to know if she killed anyone that day. He remembers Gamekeeper mentioning that after she turned, she hasn't killed a single person, which in the eyes of the Crossed makes her strong, the strongest of all of them. Shaky was still struggling to finish, even though he wanted this to happen ever since they'd met. He reassures her that she didn't kill anyone that day at the church, which makes her cry with happiness. He was still on top of her, struggling, but she heard something and thought the Reverend was coming back. She wanted him to stop and get off of her, but he refused to do it and just kept going. He also had a question. Why did she make him talk to Gamekeeper? It's because she wanted him to see who he really was, to see him as nothing, an old crippled man. Next, she wanted to know if he loves her, but the other Crossed were beginning to get annoyed with her. He claims that he does, even though in the church tower he refused to stop even though she begged him. Her eyes started rolling backward and she began having another seizure, but he didn't care. The whole time they were talking, he couldn't help but see the impatient looks on the others, and every time he replied to her questions, it only made her weaker in their eyes. Shaky finally realized just how serious the situation was when Teresa was going into shock, but instead of stopping, he pushed himself even harder inside of her, determined to make himself come. She was losing them by the second. Months of investment, months of control, All that respect was washed away in a couple of minutes for something as worthless as Shaky. That's when he knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to help his people escape, and he was going to sacrifice himself in their names. But in order to do this, he needed one last piece of claymore explosive, but he couldn't find it anywhere. He changed his strategy and asked Teresa to be strong. He wants her to lead them and show them she's not weak, but in order for that to happen, she needs to hand him over to her people. Reverend Moses eventually returned and found the two of them making love on the floor, but he saw that Teresa was unconscious and having a serious seizure. He tried to stop him and grabbed his hand, but he got punched in the face. He fell on the floor and knocked his head on the table, knocking him unconscious. Shaky takes one of the boats and steers it to the rocks where they killed Jasper because he thought there was another claymore hidden there. He wanted to lure the cross to him and then blow them up all at once, but he only managed to get their attention. Even with Reverend Moses unconscious next to him and with Teresa having a seizure, Shaky refused to stop and kept going, determined to finish one way or the other. Teresa starts crying and doesn't want him to die. Not like this, but he wanted her to act tough and assert her dominance. The other crossed were itching to maul her, especially Reverend Moses, who always doubted her decisions. She finally decides to listen to him and orders her people to go after him and fight him. They started going towards the rocks, giving Rab and his people a chance to escape in the bigger ship. Suddenly, the Reverend tells everyone to stop and wait. He has another idea. He thinks going only after Shaky would be too boring, so he attacks Teresa, trying to assert his dominance and take over as the new leader. He didn't kill her just yet, but Shaky panics, seeing his beloved injured like that, thinking that it's all been for nothing. In the past, the two crossed from the streets hear noises coming from the church's tower. It was Shaky screaming from pleasure after finally being able to come. The Reverend gives new orders to his people, asking them to leave Shaky alone because he's not important. Instead, he wants them to attack the people on the ship. Shaky puts on his pants, but he started hearing noises coming from the church downstairs. It was the sound of a door being smashed and the sound of kids crying out. The Crossed had turned their attention to the big ship and were preparing to storm on board. He decided to go down and see what was happening, but he wasn't prepared for what he was about to find. The Crossed had made their way inside the church and viciously attacked the children, mutilating their bodies and enjoying every minute of it. The Crossed throw ropes on board the ship and begin their climb, while Shaky stays helpless on the rocks in the middle of the sea. He took his gun and killed the Crossed who entered the church, but some of the kids escaped and ran upstairs to the tower. The Crossed are now on board, and they couldn't be happier thinking about all the raping and killing they are about to enjoy. They blow open one of the doors and prepare to storm inside, each of them armed with swords and knives in their hands. Shaky could see a trail of blood leading to the stairs upstairs, and he is shocked to his core. Unfortunately, the ship was abandoned, and the only person inside was Celine, who was holding the last claymore which Shaky was looking for. She detonates it just before the Crossed got to her, causing a massive explosion which blows up the entire deck. Before abandoning the ship, Rab and the others had spilled oil all over the deck, which caused a massive fire that set everyone ablaze. Every single Crossed that was aboard the ship was either blown away or burned alive. Even the water was on fire, so jumping in didn't help them much. Shaky went back upstairs, but he was too afraid to open the door. He was afraid of what he might find there. The islanders managed to slip away in the seconds before the rush, down into the darkness over the far bow. They kept quiet and watched as the ship sank to the bottom of the sea, taking all the Crossed with it. He could hear footsteps and small noises coming from the tower, but Shaky is and always has been a coward. He couldn't even bring himself to help the woman that he loves. He tried forcing himself to move and do something, but his body was unable to do anything. He wasted his story in the act of waiting. He was still alive on the rocks in the middle of the sea, but someone else was also alive. Teresa was steering towards him, but she was badly injured and bleeding heavily. He wants her to sit next to him, claiming there's no rush, and then gives her the diary to read. She scrolled through it, and after reading each page, she ripped it and threw it in the wind. These are his final moments, and he wants to finish his diary and someone to read it. Sister Teresa is special, a different breed of Crossed, maybe a super Crossed, a special strain? She doesn't have a plus on her face like the others. Instead, she has an X, which grew in size after Gamekeeper mutilated her. Shaky thinks that maybe the virus affected her differently because she was having a seizure when she was infected. Who knows? She brought Gamekeeper in the boat with her, but he was barely alive. This is the end for the three of them. It has to be the right end. That's why she did all of this until now. But she doesn't want to be the one who does it. It must be him. She wants to remain pure until the end. He gives her the final page in his diary and asks if it's a good story, but she hadn't read any of the pages, claiming she just counted the words. No more words. Be the judge, my love. Punishments and rewards. Your mess, your responsibility, your duty. Give us all an end. The islanders were on the mainland and watched what the two of them were doing, while Rab was describing everything in detail. They got into the boat and went on the open sea to finish it. Shaky took the flare gun and put it in Gamekeeper's mouth and shot him point blank. This caused a fire, but they didn't do anything and just let him burn, causing the boat to slowly sink. He and Teresa attacked each other, and they both started screaming, which quickly turned to laughter. In the end, they both hold hands as the boat sank in the water, taking all three of them with the strong current. The kids ask if they should go back to Cava, but Rab doesn't think that's such a good idea. They want to find a new home, and luckily, there are always more islands around.